Jack Holloway was ready to die. Not tonight, not by his own hand, but slowly, quietly, the way a man does when he stops fighting the loneliness that crawls into his bones every frozen Montana morning. Then came the knock, soft, desperate, almost lost to the howling wind. He grabbed his rifle, thinking wolves. Instead, he found a ghost. A woman barefoot in the snow, 4 skeletal children clinging to her skirts, and words that stopped his heart cold. "Take my children, please. Just let them live." Jack looked into those hollow eyes and saw himself 6 years ago burying his wife and son in ground so hard he broke 2 shovels. He saw the town that had given him casseroles for a week, then forgotten him entirely. And he made a choice that would either save them all or destroy what little he had left. Before we begin, if you believe in second chances and the power of mercy, subscribe to this channel. Stay with us until the very end of this journey and comment below what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story of hope travels across the world. The knock came at 4 in the morning when the world was still black and frozen. Jack Holloway woke with his hand already reaching for the rifle beside his bed, his breath fogging in the cold air of the cabin. The fire had died hours ago. He'd stopped bothering to keep it going through the night waste of wood when there was no one to keep warm but himself. Another knock. Softer this time. Weaker. Wolves didn't knock twice. He swung his legs out of bed, his joints protesting the cold, and moved toward the door in his undershirt and pants, rifle held low. 43 years old, and he moved like a man of 60, all the fight worn out of him by 6 years of silence and snow. "Who's there?" No answer, just the wind screaming across the Montana plains. Jack pulled back the bolt and opened the door 6 inches, rifle raised. What he saw made him lower the gun immediately. A woman stood on his porch, if you could call that standing. She swayed like a sapling in a storm, her dress torn and frozen stiff, her feet bare and blue against the snow. Behind her, pressed against her skirts, were 4 children. The oldest couldn't have been more than 9. The youngest maybe 2, wrapped in a blanket so thin Jack could see through it. The woman's lips were cracked and bleeding. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Take my children." Jack stared at her. "Please," she said again, and her knees buckled. "Just take them. Let them live." He caught her before she hit the ground, and the children scattered backward like startled birds. The rifle clattered against the doorframe. "Get inside," Jack said. "All of you. Now." The oldest girl hesitated, her eyes wide and distrustful. She had red hair matted against her skull and freckles barely visible under the dirt on her face. "He's not going to hurt you," the woman whispered, though she could barely hold her head up. "Go on, Lucy." Lucy grabbed the hands of the 2 middle boys and pulled them forward. The youngest child, a girl with blonde curls and a face like a porcelain doll, clung to the woman's skirts, even as Jack lifted her. "Mama," the little girl whimpered. "It's all right, Lily. Mama's here." Jack carried the woman inside and kicked the door shut behind them. The cabin was barely warmer than the outside, but at least the wind couldn't reach them here. He laid her on the bed, the only bed, and stepped back. The children stood in a tight cluster by the door, staring at him like he was a bear that might charge at any moment. "Sit," Jack said, pointing to the chairs by the cold fireplace. None of them moved. "Sit down before you fall down," he said again, sharper this time, and Lucy finally obeyed. She pulled the boys' twins, by the look of them, onto the bench beside her. The little one, Lily, stayed, standing, her thumb in her mouth. Jack crouched by the fireplace and started building a fire with hands that shook, not from cold, but from something he couldn't name. When the kindling caught, he added larger pieces and watched the flames grow. Behind him, the woman coughed a wet, rattling sound that made his chest tighten. He turned. "When did you eat last?" "3 days," Lucy answered when her mother didn't. "Mama gave us the last of the bread." 3 days. Jack looked at the children again, really looked this time, and saw the way their clothes hung off their frames like sacks. Saw the bruised hollows under their eyes. Saw the way the twins leaned against each other just to stay upright. "Stay here," he said. He went to the cupboard and pulled out everything he had. 6 eggs, a chunk of salt pork wrapped in cloth. Half a loaf of bread, gone stale. A jar of preserves his neighbor had given him last fall. He cracked the eggs into his only pan and set it over the fire, then hacked off slices of pork with his hunting knife. The smell of cooking meat filled the cabin. Lily took a step forward, then another. Jack glanced at her and saw the raw hunger in her face, not the kind that makes you whine for supper, but the kind that hollows you out from the inside until there's nothing left but desperation. "Not yet," he said quietly. "Another minute." She nodded and stepped back, but her eyes never left the pan. When the eggs were done, Jack divided them onto 2 tin plates and handed one to Lucy. "Feed the little ones first." Lucy took the plate with both hands, her fingers trembling. She broke off a piece of egg and held it to Lily's mouth, and the little girl ate like a starving animal, fast and frantic, barely chewing. The twins ate the same way, cramming food into their mouths until Lucy had to stop them. "Slow down," she said. "You'll make yourselves sick." Jack brought the second plate to the woman. She was awake now, her eyes open and glassy with fever. "Eat," he said. She shook her head. "The children, they're eating. Your turn." She tried to lift her hand and failed. Jack hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed and brought the fork to her lips. She ate slowly, tears sliding down her temples and disappearing into her hair. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack said nothing. He just kept feeding her until the plate was empty. When everyone had eaten, he added more wood to the fire and pulled the quilt off his bed. He wrapped it around the children, where they sat huddled together on the bench, and for the first time since they'd arrived, Lucy smiled just a flicker, but it was there. "What's your name?" Jack asked the woman. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Brennan." "Jack Holloway." He nodded toward the children. "That's Lucy." "Yes, the twins are Sam and Ben. Sam's got the scar on his chin. Lily's the baby. And Mary." Her voice broke. "Mary's dead." Jack went still. "Mary." "My youngest. She was 6 months old. She died 2 weeks ago. I tried to keep her warm, but..." Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth, her whole body shaking. Lucy looked away, her jaw clenched tight. Jack cleared his throat. "Your husband? Dead." Sarah's voice was flat now, scraped raw. 6 weeks ago. Logging accident up in the hills. Tree fell wrong and crushed him. They brought him home and he lived long enough to say goodbye. Then he was gone. What happened after? Sarah closed her eyes. "We had a little money. Not much, but enough for a month, maybe 2. I thought I could find work, sewing, laundry, anything. But no one would hire me. Too many children, they said. Too much trouble. When the money ran out, I went to the church. Reverend Michael said they'd pray for us. Did they help? They gave us a basket of turnips." Sarah's laugh was bitter. 3 turnips for 5 mouths. I went door to door after that. Begged every family in town. Some gave us scraps. Most turned us away. Mrs. Whitmore said I should have been more careful. Said a woman with 4 children and no husband was a burden on the community. Jack's hands curled into fists. "Where'd you go after that?" "Nowhere. We had nowhere." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at him, and the exhaustion in her gaze was bottomless. "I kept the children in our cabin as long as I could. Burned the furniture to stay warm. Fed them snow when we ran out of water. But the cold, it just kept coming. And Mary..." Her voice cracked again. "I couldn't save her." Lily whimpered and burrowed deeper into Lucy's side. 2 days ago, I knew we wouldn't last another night," Sarah continued. "So I walked. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept walking until I saw your light." Jack looked at the children, then back at Sarah. "You walked 8 miles in the snow with 4 kids and no shoes." "I had shoes when we started." She glanced down at her ruined feet. "Lost them somewhere." For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled. Finally, Jack stood. "You'll stay here tonight, all of you. I'll figure out the rest in the morning." "I can't," Sarah started. "You can't what?" "Walk back into that storm and freeze to death." Jack's voice was harder than he intended. "You asked me to take your children. Well, I'm taking all of you. End of discussion." Sarah stared at him, tears spilling over again. "Lucy," Jack said, turning to the girl. "You and your brothers take the bed. Lily sleeps with your mama. I'll take the floor." "But," Lucy began. "Do it." Lucy obeyed, herding the twins toward the bed. They climbed up and lay down without argument, too exhausted to resist. Lily crawled in beside Sarah, curling into a tight ball against her mother's side. Jack pulled on his coat and boots. "I'm going to check the animals. Lock the door behind me. Mr. Holloway." He paused at the door. "Call me Jack." "Jack." Sarah's voice was soft. "Why are you doing this?" Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because someone should have done it 6 weeks ago." He walked out into the storm. The barn was dark and cold, but at least it blocked the wind. Jack's mare Penny nickered softly when he stepped inside. He gave her an extra scoop of oats, more than he should have given how low his supplies were running, and checked the chickens. 4 hens and a rooster, just enough to keep him in eggs through the winter if he was careful. 4 hens wouldn't feed 6 people for long. Jack leaned against the barn wall and closed his eyes. What the hell was he doing? He had barely enough food to keep himself alive until spring. His savings were gone, spent on seed and tools and a new plow blade that had cracked the first time he'd used it. He owed $47 to the bank, due in 2 weeks, and he had no idea where that money was going to come from. And now he'd just invited 5 more mouths to feed into his house. He should have turned them away, should have pointed Sarah toward the church or the county office and sent her on her way. That's what any sensible man would have done. But when he closed his eyes, all he saw was Mary, the baby Sarah had lost. He saw his own son Thomas, who died of fever at 3 years old. He saw his wife Anna, who'd followed Thomas into the ground 6 months later, her heart simply giving out from grief. He'd buried them both on the hill behind the cabin under a cottonwood tree that was probably dead now. He hadn't visited their graves in 2 years. Jack opened his eyes and pushed off the wall. He fed the horse, collected 4 eggs from the hens, and walked back to the cabin. When he stepped inside, the fire was still burning. The children were asleep in the bed, a tangle of limbs and shallow breathing. Sarah was awake, staring at the ceiling. "You should sleep," Jack said quietly. "I can't." She turned her head to look at him. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a dream." "It's not." "I know." She paused. "Jack, when morning comes, you'll want us to leave. I understand. You've already done more than—" "You're not leaving." Sarah blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Jack set the eggs on the table and shrugged off his coat. "You're staying, at least until you're strong enough to walk without falling over." "I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask. I'm telling you." Jack grabbed a blanket from the trunk by the door and spread it on the floor near the fire. "Now get some sleep. We've got a long day tomorrow." Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." Jack lay down on the floor, his back to the fire, and stared at the dark wall. He didn't sleep. Morning came gray and cold. Jack woke to the sound of someone moving in the kitchen, quiet, careful movements, like a mouse trying not to be caught. He sat up and saw Lucy standing by the stove, her hands hovering over the cold iron, as if she could will it to life. "What are you doing?" Jack asked. Lucy jumped and spun around, her eyes wide. I was going to make breakfast. For the little ones. But I don't know how to work the stove." Jack rubbed his face. "You ever cooked before?" "Mama taught me a little. Before—" She stopped. "Before everything." Jack stood and walked over. "I'll show you. Watch." He rebuilt the fire, adding kindling and blowing on the embers until they caught. Then he cracked 2 of the eggs into the pan and showed Lucy how to scramble them without burning them. "You stir slow," he said. "Don't rush it." Lucy nodded, her face serious and focused. When the eggs were done, Jack handed her the spatula. "You do the next batch." She did her movements hesitant but careful. When she finished, she looked up at him with something like pride. "Good," Jack said. "Now wake your brothers, quietly." Lucy obeyed. Within minutes, the cabin was full of soft murmurs and the smell of cooking food. The twins ate without speaking, their eyes still half closed. Lily sat in Sarah's lap and nibbled at a piece of bread, her thumb back in her mouth. Sarah watched Jack over Lily's head. "You didn't have to do this." "Stop saying that," Jack said. "But I mean it. Stop." Sarah fell silent. After breakfast, Jack pulled on his coat again. "I'm going into town. Need to pick up supplies." "Town?" Sarah's face went pale. "Jack, if anyone sees me here—" "They won't. You're staying inside." He looked at Lucy. "Keep the door locked. Don't open it for anyone but me." Lucy nodded. Jack hesitated, then added, "There's a shotgun in the corner by the door. You know how to use it." "My papa taught me." "Good." Jack picked up his hat. "I'll be back by noon." He walked out before Sarah could argue. The ride into town took an hour. Bitterroot was barely a town, just a main street lined with a general store, a church, a bank, and a saloon that doubled as the hotel. In summer, it was a decent place. In winter, it was a tomb. Jack tied Penny outside the general store and stepped inside. The clerk, a thin man named Horace, with a perpetual scowl, looked up from his ledger. "Holloway, didn't expect to see you." "Need supplies," Jack said. "Flour, salt, coffee, whatever you can spare." Horace raised an eyebrow. "You got money. I'll trade." "Trade what you already sold me, every damn thing you own." Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out his father's watch, a silver piece with his initials engraved on the back. He set it on the counter. Horace picked it up, turned it over. "This it?" "That's it." "Fine, I'll give you $10 credit." "It's worth 30. "Not to me." Horace set the watch down. "Take it or leave it." Jack's jaw tightened. Then he nodded. "I'll take it." Horace loaded a sack with flour, a small bag of salt, and a tin of coffee. "That'll cover it. Anything else?" "No." Jack grabbed the sack and turned to leave and nearly ran into Cyrus Webb, the banker, standing in the doorway. Webb was a tall man with a neat beard and a smile that never reached his eyes. He tipped his hat. "Jack, good to see you." "Cyrus." "I was just about to ride out to your place." Webb's smile widened. "Wanted to remind you about that payment. 2 weeks, Jack. $47. "I know." "Do you have it?" "I'll have it." "Good, because if you don't—" Webb spread his hands. "Well, you know how these things go. Bank takes the land. You take the road." Jack pushed past him without answering. Behind him, Webb called out, "2 weeks, Jack." Jack didn't look back. He was halfway home when he saw the smoke. At first, he thought it was just chimney smoke from a neighboring ranch, but as he got closer, he realized it was too thick, too dark, and it was coming from the direction of his cabin. Jack spurred Penny into a gallop. By the time he reached the cabin, his heart was hammering so hard he could barely breathe. But the cabin was intact, no flames, no damage. The smoke was coming from the chimney, thick and black. He burst through the door. Inside, Sarah was kneeling by the fireplace, coughing and waving her hands at the smoke. The children were pressed against the far wall, crying. "What the hell happened?" Jack shouted. "I tried to add wood," Sarah gasped. "But I think the flue—" Jack grabbed the poker and shoved it up the chimney, dislodging a clump of frozen debris. The smoke began to clear. "Get outside," he said. "All of you, now." They stumbled out into the snow, still coughing. Jack followed, slamming the door behind him. For a moment they all just stood there breathing hard. Then Lily started to laugh. It was a small hiccuping sound, but it broke the tension like a stone through ice. Sam and Ben started laughing too, and then Lucy, and finally even Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Jack stared at them. Then, against his will, he smiled. "All right," he said. "Let's try this again." They went back inside, and this time Jack taught Sarah how to manage the fire properly. She learned quickly, her hands steady despite the cold. By the time the sun set, the cabin was warm again, and the children were fed. That night, as Jack lay on the floor and listened to the sound of 6 people breathing in the dark, he realized something. For the first time in 6 years, the silence was gone. And he wasn't sure he ever wanted it back. 3 days passed before Jack realized the children had been sleeping in their clothes. He noticed it at breakfast when Lucy tugged at her collar, the same collar she'd been tugging at since they arrived. The fabric was stiff with dirt and sweat, and when she moved, he caught the sour smell of unwashed bodies. "Sarah," he said quietly, "the kids need baths." Sarah's face flushed. "I know. We don't have any other clothes. If I wash these, they'll have nothing to wear while they dry." Jack set down his coffee. "There's a trunk in the corner. Anna's things, and Thomas's. See if anything fits." Sarah's eyes widened. "Jack, I can't." "Yes, you can." He stood and walked to the door. "I'll heat water. You sort through the trunk." He spent the next hour hauling bucket after bucket from the pump, heating them on the stove, until the big wash basin was full. Lucy helped, her thin arms straining with the weight. She didn't complain once. When the water was ready, Jack stepped outside. "I'll be in the barn. Call me when you're done." He heard splashing and laughter through the cabin walls as he worked sounds he hadn't heard in 6 years. Sarah's voice patient and gentle. Lily shrieking when the soap got in her eyes. The twins arguing over who got to go first. By the time Sarah called him back in the cabin, smelled like lye soap and wet hair. The children sat wrapped in blankets by the fire, their faces pink and scrubbed clean. Lucy wore one of Anna's old dresses, taken in at the waist with a belt. The twins were swimming in Thomas's shirts. Lily looked like a doll in a nightgown that dragged on the floor. "Better?" Jack asked. Lucy smiled, a real smile this time, not just a flicker. "Much better." Sarah was still damp, her hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She wore Anna's blue cotton dress, the one Anna had worn on Sundays. It fit her almost perfectly. Jack looked away quickly. "I'll hang the wet clothes outside. They'll freeze, but at least they'll dry." "Thank you," Sarah said softly. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat by the fire and mended the tears in their old clothes by candlelight. Jack watched her from his spot on the floor, the way her fingers moved with quiet efficiency, the way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I do." She didn't look up. "You've given us so much already. The least I can do is keep us from falling apart at the seams." "Sarah." "I mean it, Jack." Now she did look up, and her eyes were fierce. "You gave us your bed, your food, your wife's clothes. You traded your father's watch for flour. Don't think I didn't notice. So please let me do this." Jack opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he nodded. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the whisper of thread through fabric. "Tell me about them," Sarah said suddenly. "Who?" "Your wife. Your son." She hesitated. "If it's not too painful." Jack stared at the fire. No one had asked him about Anna and Thomas in years. After the funerals, people had stopped saying their names, as if silence could erase grief. "Anna was a schoolteacher," he said finally. "Back in Ohio. I met her at a church social. She had red hair, not like Lucy's darker, and she laughed at all my terrible jokes. We got married and moved out here to start the ranch. She hated the cold, but she never complained. Not once. What about Thomas? He looked just like her. Same red hair, same laugh. He loved animals, used to follow me around the barn asking 100 questions about every chicken and horse. Smart as a whip. Jack's voice roughened. He got sick in the winter of 19. Fever wouldn't break. The doctor came, but there was nothing he could do. Thomas died in Anna's arms. Sarah's hands stilled. 6 months later, Anna just gave up. Went to bed one night and didn't wake up. Doc said it was her heart, but I knew better. She died of a broken heart, simple as that. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Don't be. It was a long time ago. Grief doesn't care how long it's been. Jack looked at her. No, I suppose it doesn't. Sarah set down her sewing. My husband Daniel, he was a good man. Not perfect, but good. He worked hard. Loved the children. When the tree fell... She stopped, swallowed. The other logger said he pushed one of them out of the way. Saved the man's life and lost his own. That was Daniel, always thinking of everyone else. Sounds like someone else I know, Jack said. Sarah gave him a sad smile. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two broken people trying to hold broken children together with spit and prayer. Maybe that's enough. Maybe. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different. Less lonely. As if the ghosts they carried had finally found company in each other. The next morning, Jack woke to find Lucy already at the stove scrambling eggs with fierce concentration. Sarah was braiding Lily's hair at the table. The twins were arguing over who got to feed the chickens. It felt like a real home. Jack pulled on his boots and coat. I'm going to check the fence line. Lucy, you're in charge until I get back. Lucy nodded solemnly. The fence line took him 2 hours to inspect, and what he found wasn't good. 3 posts had cracked in the cold, and the wire was sagging in a dozen places. If he didn't fix it soon, Penny would wander off, or worse, wolves would wander in. But fixing it meant buying new posts and wire, and that meant money he didn't have. Jack stood in the snow and did the math in his head. $47 to the bank in 12 days. Maybe $3 left in his pocket. No way to earn more before spring unless he sold something. The problem was, he'd already sold everything worth selling. Except Penny. The thought hit him like a fist to the gut. Penny was 20 years old, steady and reliable. She wasn't worth much, but she might bring $30. Add that to what he had, and he'd almost have enough. Almost. Jack looked back toward the cabin, barely visible through the trees. He thought about Sarah mending clothes by candlelight, Lucy learning to cook, the twins finally laughing, Lily calling him Mr. Jack in her tiny, serious voice. He couldn't let the bank take the ranch. Not now. Not when he finally had something to lose. Jack walked back to the cabin and found Sarah alone in the kitchen. The children were outside building a lopsided snowman. Sarah, he said, I need to ask you something. She turned from the stove. What is it? Your husband's watch. The one you mentioned. Do you still have it? Her face went carefully blank. Yes. Why? I need to sell it. No. Sarah. I said no, Jack. Her voice was quiet, but immovable. That watch was Daniel's father's and his father's before that. It's the only thing I have left of him. You can't ask me to... I owe the bank $47, Jack interrupted. I've got 12 days to pay it or they take the ranch. I've already sold my father's watch. If I sell Penny, I might have enough. But if I don't, then sell the horse and take the watch money, Sarah said. I won't take your... Why not? Sarah stepped closer, her eyes blazing. You took us in when no one else would. You fed us, gave us clothes and shelter and dignity. Why is it so hard for you to let me help you? Because it's not your burden to carry. Neither were we, but you carried us anyway. Sarah's voice cracked. "Jack, you're going to lose everything if you don't let me do this. And if you lose the ranch, where do we go? Back to town. Back to the people who let my baby die." Jack stared at her. "We're in this together now," Sarah said more quietly. "Whether you like it or not. So stop being a stubborn fool and let me help you." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Jack said, "The watch and the horse together might be enough." "Might." "Then we'll make it enough." Sarah reached up and touched his arm. "Please, Jack. Let me do this." Jack looked at her hand on his sleeve, small and work-worn but steady. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "We'll go to town tomorrow, together." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He lay on the floor and listened to the wind howl outside, thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if the watch wasn't worth as much as Sarah thought? What if no one wanted to buy Penny? What if the bank refused to wait even one more day? Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps. Sarah knelt beside him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You're thinking too loud," she whispered. "You'll wake the children." "Sorry." "Don't be." She sat down, her back against the wall. "I can't sleep either." They sat in the darkness, not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. "Jack," Sarah said after a while, "what happens if we can't pay?" "Then we leave." "And go where?" "I don't know." Sarah pulled the blanket tighter. "I'm scared." "Me too." "I haven't been this scared since—" She stopped. "Since the night Mary died. I held her and felt her go cold, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I thought that was the worst thing I'd ever feel, but this losing you, losing this place." "You're not going to lose me," Jack said. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Jack turned to look at her, and even in the darkness, he could see the fear in her eyes. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. You and me and those 4 kids in there. We're a family now. That doesn't change even if we lose the roof over our heads." Sarah's breath hitched. "A family. Isn't that what we are?" She didn't answer. She just leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that until the fire burned low and the first gray light of dawn crept through the window. The ride to town was brutal. Jack drove the wagon with Sarah beside him, and the children huddled in the back under a pile of blankets. Penny was tied behind, plodding through the snow, with her head low. Lucy held Lily tight, whispering stories to keep her distracted. The twins were silent, their faces pinched with cold. "Almost there," Jack called back. "Hang on." When they reached Bitterroot, Jack pulled the wagon up outside the general store. He helped Sarah down, then lifted Lily and set her on the ground. "Lucy, you and the boys stay with your sisters," he said. "Keep them warm. Your mama and I will be back soon." Lucy nodded, her jaw set. Jack and Sarah walked into the store together. Horace looked up from his counter, his eyes widening when he saw Sarah. "Well," he said slowly. "Sarah Brennan. Didn't expect to see you again." "Hello, Horace," Sarah said coldly. Horace's gaze slid to Jack. "She's staying with you?" "That's none of your business," Jack said. "We're here to sell something." Sarah pulled the watch from her pocket and set it on the counter. It was gold, intricately engraved with a chain that gleamed even in the dim light of the store. Horace picked it up and turned it over. "Nice piece. Where'd you get it?" "It was my husband's," Sarah said. "How much?" Jack asked. Horace pursed his lips. $20. "It's worth 50, Sarah said sharply. "Not to me." "Then we'll take it somewhere else," Jack said, reaching for the watch. "Wait." Horace set it down. 30. Final offer." Jack looked at Sarah. She nodded. "Fine," Jack said. "We'll take it." Horace counted out $30 in bills and coins. Jack pocketed the money, and they walked out. Outside, a small crowd had gathered around the wagon. Mrs. Whitmore was there, her face twisted with disapproval. So was Reverend Michaels, his hands clasped in front of him like he was praying. And Cyrus Webb, leaning against the hitching post with his arms crossed. "Well, well," Webb said. "Jack Holloway and the widow Brennan. How cozy." Jack ignored him. He untied Penny and led her toward the livery stable. "Going somewhere, Jack," Webb called. "Selling my horse," Jack said without turning around. "Ah, trying to scrape together that payment, are you?" Webb laughed. "Good luck with that." Jack kept walking. At the livery, the stableman, a grizzled old man named Pete, looked Penny over and shook his head. "She's old, Jack. 20 if she's a day. I'll give you 15. She's worth twice that. Maybe 10 years ago. Not now." Jack's hands clenched. 15 plus 30 was 45. $2 short. 20, Jack said. "Please, Pete, I need 20. Pete sighed. "I like you, Jack. Always have. But I can't give you what she's not worth. Best I can do is 17. 17. 47 total. Exactly what he needed." Jack swallowed hard. "Deal." Pete counted out the money. Jack took it, then turned to Penny. He stroked her neck one last time, feeling the old mare's warmth under his hand. "You've been a good horse," he said quietly. Penny nuzzled his shoulder. Jack walked away before he could change his mind. When he got back to the wagon, Sarah was waiting. The crowd had grown. Mrs. Whitmore was talking loudly about sin and propriety, and several townspeople had stopped to listen. "Shameful," Mrs. Whitmore said. "A widow and a widower living under one roof with no propriety whatsoever." "They're trying to survive," someone muttered. "Survival is no excuse for impropriety." Jack climbed onto the wagon. "Let's go." "Wait." Cyrus Webb stepped forward. "You have my money, Jack." Jack pulled out the bills, $47 exactly, and handed them over. Webb counted them slowly, deliberately. Then he smiled. "Well, looks like you made it after all." "We're done here," Jack said. "Not quite." Webb tucked the money into his coat. "See, Jack, I've been thinking. A man like you living alone with a woman and her children, people talk. And when people talk, the bank listens. We have a reputation to uphold." Jack went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the bank can't be associated with immoral behavior. So here's the deal: you marry her. Make it proper, or I call the loan due in full." The crowd went silent. Sarah's face drained of color. "You can't do that." "I can and I will," Webb said. "You've got 1 week, Jack. Get married or get out." Jack climbed down from the wagon. He walked straight up to Webb and stopped so close their faces were inches apart. "You had your money," Jack said quietly. "The loan is paid. The terms have changed. Then I'll see you in court. You can't afford a lawyer, Jack. We both know that." Webb's smile widened. "Face it, you're out of options." For a moment, Jack thought about hitting him. His fist was clenched, his arm drawn back. It would have felt so good to wipe that smirk off Webb's face. Then he felt Sarah's hand on his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "He's not worth it." Jack lowered his fist. Webb chuckled. "Smart woman. Better listen to her, Jack." He tipped his hat. 1 week. Clock's ticking." He walked away, and the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves. Jack climbed back onto the wagon. His hands were shaking. "Jack," Sarah began. "Not now," he said. They rode home in silence. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah found Jack standing outside in the cold, staring at the dark shape of the barn. "You're going to freeze out here," she said. "Don't care." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "Talk to me." "What's there to talk about?" Jack's voice was rough. "Webb's got us cornered. Either we get married or we lose everything." "Would that be so terrible?" Jack turned to stare at her. "What?" "Getting married." Sarah met his gaze. "Would it really be so terrible?" Sarah, you don't want to marry me just because some banker says you have to. You're right. I don't. Sarah stepped closer. But that's not why I'd do it. Jack's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying. Sarah stopped, took a breath. I'm saying that for the first time in 6 weeks I feel safe. The children are fed. They're warm. They're happy. And it's because of you. She reached up and touched his face. You could have turned us away, Jack. You had every reason to. But you didn't. You took us in and gave us a home. And now I can't imagine leaving. That's gratitude talking. No, it's not. Her voice was fierce. It's more than that, and you know it. Every time you look at Lucy, I see you remembering your son. Every time you sit by the fire with Lily in your lap, I see you healing. We're healing each other, Jack. Can't you feel it? Jack closed his eyes. He could feel it. God help him, he could feel it in every breath he took, the way the cabin didn't feel so empty anymore, the way mornings didn't hurt quite as much, the way Sarah's voice could pull him out of the darkest corners of his grief. It's too soon, he said weakly. For who you me? Sarah shook her head. We're not 20 years old with all the time in the world, Jack. We're two people who've already lost everything once. Maybe that means we know better than to waste what we're given. Jack opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her. At the strength in her face, the quiet courage that had carried her through hell and kept her standing. At the way she looked at him like he was something more than just a broken man on a failing ranch. I don't want you to do this because you feel obligated, he said. I don't feel obligated. I feel... Sarah paused. I feel like maybe we were meant to find each other. Like maybe God or fate or whatever you want to call it put us on the same path because we needed each other. What about your husband? Daniel's gone. I'll always love him and I'll never forget him. But he's gone. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I can't keep living in the past, Jack. Neither can you. At some point we have to choose to keep living. And I choose this. I choose you. Jack's throat tightened. The kids? The kids already call you Papa when they think I'm not listening. That broke something in him. Jack pulled Sarah into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. She smelled like soap and wood smoke and something else, something warm and alive that he'd forgotten existed. Say yes. Sarah whispered against his chest. Please, Jack. Say yes. Jack pulled back just enough to look at her. You sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything. All right, he said. All right. We'll get married. Sarah smiled a real smile, bright and unguarded, and for the first time since she'd knocked on his door, Jack felt something other than fear. He felt hope. They told the children at breakfast the next morning. Lucy looked up from her eggs. You're getting married. Yes, Sarah said. If that's all right with you. Lucy glanced at her brothers, then at Lily, then back at Jack. Does that mean we get to stay? Forever, Jack said. Lily squealed and launched herself at Jack, wrapping her arms around his neck. Papa! Jack caught her and held her close, his eyes burning. The twins just nodded, solemn and serious, but Jack saw the relief in their faces. Lucy smiled. Good. I like it here. Me too, Jack said quietly. That afternoon, Jack hitched a ride into town with a neighbor and went straight to the courthouse. The clerk gave him the paperwork and Jack filled it out with hands that shook slightly. When he got back to the cabin, Sarah was waiting on the porch. She wore Anna's blue dress again, her hair pinned up. It's done, Jack said. We can get married at the courthouse on Saturday. Sarah nodded. Saturday. They stood there for a moment, not quite touching the weight of what they were about to do, settling between them. No regrets, Jack asked. None, Sarah said, and when she smiled at him, Jack believed her. Friday night, Jack couldn't sleep again. He lay on the floor and stared at the ceiling, listening to Sarah breathe in the bed across the room. Tomorrow they'd stand in front of a judge and say words that would bind them together for life. Tomorrow she'd become his wife, and he'd become a father to 4 children who'd lost everything. The weight of it pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. What if he failed them? What if the ranch didn't make it through spring? What if another hard winter came and he couldn't keep them fed? What if Sarah woke up one morning and realized she'd married him out of desperation? Not love. Jack. He turned his head. Sarah was sitting up in bed, her hair loose around her shoulders. "You're doing it again," she said softly. "Thinking too loud. Can't help it." Sarah climbed out of bed and crossed to where he lay. She sat down beside him, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. "Tell me what you're afraid of," she said. "Everything." Jack's voice came out rough. "I'm afraid I'll let you down. Afraid I'll fail those kids. Afraid you'll regret this." "I won't." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Sarah reached down and took his hand. Her fingers were warm. "Jack, do you know what I was afraid of when I knocked on your door? Dying." "No. I'd already made peace with dying. I was afraid of living." She squeezed his hand. "I was afraid of waking up day after day in a world that had taken everything from me. Afraid of watching my children fade away one by one. Afraid of dying alone in the cold with no one to remember us." Jack's throat tightened. "But then you opened that door," Sarah continued. "And you didn't just take us in, you gave us a reason to keep going. You gave the children hope. You gave me hope. So no, Jack, I won't regret marrying you tomorrow. The only thing I'd regret is not saying yes." Jack sat up and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, resting her head against his chest. "I don't know how to be a husband anymore," he whispered. "Don't know how to be a father." "Neither do I. I don't know how to be a wife to anyone but Daniel." Sarah pulled back to look at him. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to be what we were before. Maybe we can just be what we are now. And what's that? 2 broken people trying to build something whole." Jack touched her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You're not broken. Neither are you, not anymore." Sarah leaned into his touch. "Tomorrow, Jack. Tomorrow we start over." "Tomorrow," he agreed. They sat together until the fire burned low and the first light of dawn crept through the window. Then Sarah stood and went to wake the children, and Jack went outside to face the day that would change everything. The courthouse was packed. Jack hadn't expected that. He'd thought it would be just him and Sarah, the judge, maybe a witness or 2. Instead, it seemed like half of Bitterroot had shown up, some out of curiosity, some out of judgment, and a few, Jack suspected, out of genuine goodwill. Mrs. Whitmore stood near the front with her arms crossed and her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Reverend Michaels hovered near the door, looking uncomfortable. Cyrus Webb leaned against the back wall with that same smug smile. And then there were the others. Pete from the livery. Old Mrs. Henderson, who'd given Sarah a loaf of bread once back before things got bad. A few ranchers Jack had known for years, men who'd kept their distance during his grief but had never been cruel. Sarah stood beside Jack in her blue dress, her hand trembling in his. The children clustered around them, Lucy holding Lily. The twins pressed close to Jack's legs. Judge Warren, a stern man with white whiskers, looked over his spectacles at the crowd. "Well, this is irregular." "We just want to get married, Your Honor," Jack said. "I can see that." Warren shuffled through his papers. "Jack Holloway and Sarah Brennan, is it?" "Yes, sir." "Any objections?" Warren looked at the crowd. For a moment no one spoke. Then Cyrus Webb pushed off the wall. "I have a question, Your Honor." Jack's jaw tightened. "What is it, Mr. Webb?" Warren asked. "Just wondering if this marriage is legitimate or merely convenient." Webb smiled. "After all, Mr. Holloway here was facing foreclosure until Mrs. Brennan appeared. Seems mighty suspicious timing, doesn't it?" The loan was paid, Jack said flatly. Under duress. And now you're marrying the woman whose watch paid half of it. Webb looked at the crowd. Makes a man wonder what other arrangements have been made. Sarah's face went white. That's enough, Webb, Judge Warren said sharply. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Your Honor. A widow and a widower living together for weeks with no supervision, no propriety. I said that's enough. But the damage was done. Jack could see it in the faces around him, the doubt, the suspicion, the ugly curiosity. He felt Sarah's hand slip from his. It's true, Sarah said quietly. The room went silent. What? Jack turned to her. Sarah lifted her chin and looked straight at Webb. It's true. We lived under the same roof for weeks before this. Just the two of us and my children. No chaperone. No propriety. She paused. And do you know why? Webb's smile faltered. Because I had nowhere else to go. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. Because I knocked on every door in this town, begging for help, and every single one of you turned me away. Mrs. Whitmore told me I should have been more careful. Reverend Michaels gave me 3 turnips. Mr. Webb here threatened to take my home when I couldn't pay rent. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red. My baby died because no one would help us, Sarah said, and her voice cracked. Mary was 6 months old, and she froze to death in my arms because I had no wood for the fire and no food in my belly to feed her. And when I finally walked 8 miles through the snow with 4 starving children barefoot and half dead, the only person who opened his door was Jack Holloway. Jack reached for her hand again. This time she held on tight. So yes, Sarah said, we lived together. And yes, it was improper. And yes, I'm marrying him partly because the bank demanded it. But I'm also marrying him because he's the only person in this entire town who saw me as a human being instead of a burden. Because he gave my children a reason to smile again. Because when I asked him to take my children and leave me to die, he said no, he'd take all of us. Tears streamed down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. So, if you want to judge us, go ahead, Sarah said. But remember that when my family needed you, you failed us. And when Jack needed nothing from me, he saved us. That's the kind of man I'm marrying, and I'm proud to do it. The silence that followed was absolute. Then from the back of the room, Pete cleared his throat. She's right. Everyone turned. Pete stepped forward, his hat in his hands. We should have helped her, should have done something, but we didn't. We let that baby die, and we let this woman and her kids nearly starve, and we all got to go home and sleep in our warm beds and feel real good about ourselves. He looked at Jack. You're a better man than any of us, Holloway. And if this town had any sense, they'd be thanking you instead of judging you. Amen to that, someone muttered. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward next. I only gave you 1 loaf of bread, Sarah. I should have given you 10. I should have opened my home. I'm sorry. Me too, another voice said. And another. One by one, people began to speak, some apologizing, some defending Jack and Sarah, some just acknowledging their own failures. The tide of judgment turned to something else. Not quite redemption, but close. Mrs. Whitmore said nothing. She just turned and walked out, her back rigid. Judge Warren cleared his throat. Well, now that we've had our town meeting, can we get back to the matter at hand? He looked at Jack and Sarah. Do you still want to get married? Jack looked at Sarah. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. Yes, Jack said. Yes, Sarah echoed. Good. Then let's do this properly. Warren picked up his book. Jack Holloway, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, until death do you part? Jack's voice was steady. I do. Sarah Brennan, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do, Sarah said. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." Warren closed his book. "You may kiss the bride." Jack turned to Sarah. She looked up at him, her eyes shining, and he leaned down and kissed her gently. It was brief and chaste, but it felt like a promise. When they pulled apart, the room erupted in applause. Lily shrieked with joy and threw her arms around Jack's legs. Lucy was crying, smiling through her tears. The twins looked solemn but pleased, as if they'd just witnessed something important. People came forward to shake Jack's hand and hug Sarah. Pete handed Jack $5 and refused to take it back. Mrs. Henderson pressed a jar of preserves into Sarah's hands. One of the ranchers promised to bring by a side of beef in the spring. Even Cyrus Webb approached, though he didn't offer congratulations. He just looked at Jack for a long moment, then said quietly, "You've got guts, Holloway. I'll give you that." Then he left. By the time they made it outside, the sun was high and bright, and the snow sparkled like diamonds. Jack helped Sarah into the wagon, then lifted the children up one by one. As they drove out of town, Lucy leaned forward. "Are we really a family now, Papa?" Jack glanced at Sarah. She smiled and nodded. "Yes," Jack said. "We really are." "Good," Lucy said, and settled back with Lily in her lap. The ride home was quiet but content. Jack held the reins with one hand, and Sarah's hand with the other, and for the first time in years, he felt like he might actually deserve the second chance he'd been given. That night, after the children were asleep, Jack stood outside and looked at the stars. Sarah found him there, wrapped in her shawl. "What are you thinking about, babe?" "Everything." Jack turned to her. "You know this won't be easy, right? Spring's still months away. We're low on food, low on money. The ranch needs work I can't afford to do. And we've got 4 kids to feed." "5, Sarah said. Jack blinked. "What?" Sarah took his hand and placed it on her stomach. 5. It took him a moment to understand. When he did, his breath caught. "You're about 2 months along, I think. I wasn't sure until a few days ago." Sarah bit her lip. "I was afraid to tell you. Afraid it would be too much." Jack stared at her, his hand still on her belly. A baby. Another child. Another mouth to feed, another life depending on him. He should have been terrified. Instead, he started laughing. Sarah looked alarmed. "Jack!" He pulled her into his arms and spun her around, and she gasped and clung to him. When he set her down, he was grinning like a fool. "A baby," he said. "We're having a baby." "You're not angry." "Angry, Sarah. I'm..." He stopped searching for the right words. "I'm happy. Terrified, but happy." Sarah's face broke into a smile. "Really? Really?" Jack kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips. "We'll figure it out. Somehow, we'll figure it out." "I love you," Sarah whispered. Jack froze. She'd never said it before. Neither had he. "I love you too," he said, and meant it with everything in him. They stood there under the stars, holding each other, and Jack thought about how much his life had changed in 3 weeks. How a knock on the door had turned his loneliness into something loud and messy and beautiful. How a starving widow and her children had given him a reason to keep breathing. The road ahead was uncertain. Winter was far from over, and survival was never guaranteed. But for the first time in 6 years, Jack wasn't facing it alone, and that made all the difference. The next morning, Jack woke to chaos. Something was wrong. He could feel it before he even opened his eyes. There was shouting outside, and the children were crying. He bolted upright. "Sarah!" She was already at the window, her face pale. "Jack, the chickens!" He didn't wait to hear more. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside in his bare feet. The chicken coop was destroyed. The door hung off its hinges, and feathers were scattered everywhere. 3 of the hens were dead, torn apart. The rooster was gone. And in the snow, clear as day, were wolf tracks, dozens of them. Lucy stood by the coop with tears streaming down her face. "I heard them, Papa. I heard them killing the chickens, but I was too scared to come out." "You did the right thing," Jack said quickly. "Never go outside when there's wolves. You hear me?" Lucy nodded, still crying. Jack surveyed the damage. 3 hens dead, 1 missing. That left him with 1 hen, 1 and no rooster. No eggs come spring. No way to rebuild the flock. Sarah came outside with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked at the coop and closed her eyes. "Oh no." "We'll figure it out," Jack said, but even he didn't believe it. The twins came running out, their faces white. "Papa, the barn?" Jack's heart dropped. He ran for the barn with Sarah right behind him. Inside, Penny's old stall had been torn apart. The wolves had gotten in through a gap in the wall, one Jack had known about but hadn't fixed because he didn't have the wood. They'd eaten half the winter hay and scattered the rest. The feed sacks were shredded. "No," Sarah whispered. "No, no, no." Jack wanted to scream, wanted to put his fist through something. Instead, he just stood there, staring at the destruction. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Bad." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "The hay was supposed to last until spring. Now we've got maybe 2 weeks' worth. The chickens are gone. We've got no way to replace what we lost. What do we do?" Jack looked at her, at his wife carrying his child, trusting him to keep them safe. And he had no answer. "I don't know," he said. They spent the rest of the day trying to salvage what they could. Jack patched the hole in the barn with planks torn from the chicken coop. Sarah gathered the scattered hay and stored it in the cabin where the wolves couldn't reach it. The children helped where they could, silent and frightened. By nightfall, everyone was exhausted. Jack built up the fire and heated the last of the soup. There wasn't much, barely a bowl each, but it was all they had. As they ate in silence, Lily looked up at Jack with wide eyes. "Papa, are the wolves going to come back?" "Not tonight," Jack said. "I fixed the barn." "But what if they do? Then I'll protect you." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer. She climbed into his lap and rested her head against his chest, and Jack held her close. Across the fire, Lucy watched him with something like fear. "Papa, are we going to starve?" "No," Jack said firmly. "But you said—" "I know what I said. But we're not going to starve, I promise." He had no idea how he'd keep that promise, but he said it anyway, because that's what fathers did. They made promises they had no business making, and then killed themselves trying to keep them. After the children were asleep, Sarah sat beside Jack by the fire. "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep." "I'll keep it." "How?" Sarah's voice was gentle, but insistent. "We have 2 weeks of hay, a handful of flour, and 1 chicken. The nearest town is a day's ride, and we have no horse. How are you going to keep that promise, Jack?" "I'll figure something out." "You keep saying that." "Because I will." Jack turned to look at her. "I didn't survive 6 years alone just to let my family starve now. There's always a way. I just have to find it." Sarah studied his face for a long moment. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then we'll find it together." The next morning, Jack took inventory. They had maybe 10 pounds of flour left, a small sack of cornmeal, some salt, 1 jar of preserves, 2 potatoes. The 1 remaining hen hadn't laid an egg in days, probably too stressed from the wolf attack. Jack did the math in his head. Rationing carefully, they might make it 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if they started skipping meals. But winter lasted at least 8 more weeks. And that was if they were lucky. He sat at the table with his head in his hands, trying to think. There had to be something he could sell, something he could trade. But he'd already sold everything of value. The watch, the horse, even his father's rifle. "Papa!" Jack looked up. Lucy stood in the doorway, twisting her hands together. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I've been thinking." Lucy came closer. "What if we ate less? The little ones need food more than I do. I could just—" "No." Jack's voice was sharp. "Absolutely not." "But—" "I said no, Lucy." Jack softened his tone. "You're a growing girl. You need to eat. We all do." "Then what are we going to do?" Jack wished he had an answer. That afternoon, he went hunting. He took his bow, he couldn't afford to waste bullets, and walked for hours through the snow, looking for deer, rabbit, anything. But the land was empty. The wolves had scared everything away, or the cold had driven them south. He came home empty-handed. Sarah didn't say anything, but he saw the worry in her eyes. That night, Jack lay awake and listened to his family sleep. Lucy was curled up with Lily. The twins were sprawled across the foot of the bed. Sarah was beside him, her hand resting on her barely swollen belly. Jack thought about his promise, thought about how he'd looked Lucy in the eye, and told her they wouldn't starve. And then he thought about his pride, the stupid, stubborn pride that had kept him from asking for help when Anna died, that had kept him alone for 6 years, that had almost cost him everything. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake Sarah. There was one thing he hadn't tried yet. One person he hadn't asked. It would mean swallowing what was left of his pride. It would mean admitting he couldn't do this alone. But pride didn't keep children fed. Jack stood and pulled on his coat. He walked outside into the cold and looked toward the road that led to town. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd go to town and beg if he had to. He'd ask every rancher, every shopkeeper, every person who'd shown up at his wedding. He'd offer to work, to trade, to do whatever it took, because he'd made a promise. And Jack Holloway didn't break his promises. Morning came gray and bitter cold. Jack was up before dawn, checking the barn, feeding the single chicken, trying to make their dwindling supplies stretch a little further. When he came back inside, Sarah was awake. "You're going to town," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. I'm coming with you." "Sarah, don't argue with me, Jack. If we're begging together." She stood and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. "Lucy can watch the children." Lucy appeared from behind the curtain that divided the cabin. "I'll keep them safe, Papa. I promise." Jack looked at his daughter, because that's what she was now, his daughter, and saw Anna's strength in her face. "All right," he said. "Sarah and I will be back by dark. Keep the door locked. Don't go outside unless you have to. And if anything happens—" "Fire 3 shots," Lucy finished. "I know." Jack pulled her into a quick hug. "You're braver than I ever was at your age." Lucy blushed. "I learned from you, Papa." The walk to town took 3 hours. Jack and Sarah barely spoke, saving their strength for what lay ahead. The wind cut through their clothes like knives, and by the time they reached Bitterroot, Sarah's lips were blue. "We'll start with Pete," Jack said. "Then the general store. Then—" "Jack." He turned. Sarah was staring down the main street, her face pale. Jack followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. Every building had a notice nailed to its door. Even from a distance, Jack could read the bold black letters, "Closed by order of County Health Department. Scarlet fever quarantine." The town was empty. The streets were deserted. Not a soul in sight. "No," Jack whispered. He ran to the general store and pounded on the door. "Horace, Horace, open up!" No answer. He tried the next building, then the next. All locked. All empty. Finally, a voice called out from an upstairs window. "They're all gone, Holloway." Jack looked up. Old man Tucker, the blacksmith, was leaning out with a cloth tied around his face. "What happened?" Jack shouted. "Fever came through 2 weeks ago. Started with the school kids, spread from there. Half the town's sick. The other half left. I'm the only fool who stayed. Tucker coughed. You two need to get out of here before you catch it. We need food, Jack said desperately. Supplies. Is there anyone? Nobody's got anything to spare, Holloway. We're all barely hanging on ourselves. Tucker pulled back from the window. Go home. Keep your family safe. The window slammed shut. Jack stood in the empty street, Sarah beside him, and felt the last of his hope crumble. We should go, Sarah said quietly, before we bring the fever home to the children. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to break down every door until he found someone who could help. But Sarah was right. If they got sick, if they brought scarlet fever back to the cabin, the children didn't stand a chance. They walked home in silence, and with every step, Jack felt the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He'd made a promise he couldn't keep, and now his family would pay the price. When they reached the cabin, Lucy was waiting on the porch with the rifle across her lap. Did you get food? She asked, hope bright in her eyes. Jack couldn't meet her gaze. No. The hope died. Lucy looked down at the rifle, her jaw trembling. What are we going to do? I don't know yet, Jack said quietly. He walked past her into the cabin. The twins were huddled by the fire, playing some quiet game with sticks and stones. Lily sat on the bed, sucking her thumb and watching them with hollow eyes. They all looked thinner than they had a week ago. Sarah came in behind Jack and immediately went to stir the pot hanging over the fire. She ladled out thin soup into bowls, more water than anything else, and handed them to the children. Is this all? Sam asked, staring at his bowl. It's enough, Sarah said firmly. But it wasn't, and they all knew it. Jack stood by the door and watched his family eat watery soup and try to pretend they weren't still hungry. He felt something break inside him, something that had been cracking since the wolves came, since the town turned out to be empty, since he realized his promise meant nothing against the reality of winter. That night, after the children were asleep, Jack sat by the dying fire and stared at nothing. Sarah came and sat beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Sarah said, We could go back to the town I came from. It's 3 days' walk, but maybe... No. Jack's voice was flat. That town let Mary die. They won't help us now. Then what? I said I don't know. Sarah flinched at his tone. Jack. I can't think right now, Sarah. Just give me a minute to think. But thinking didn't help. Thinking just reminded him of everything he didn't have, everything he couldn't do, everything he'd promised and failed to deliver. Sarah stood slowly. I'm going to bed. Jack nodded without looking at her. He sat alone by the fire until it burned down to embers, and even then, he didn't move. His mind kept circling back to the same impossible question, how do you feed 5 people soon to be 6 with nothing? The answer he knew was that you couldn't. Somewhere around midnight, he heard footsteps. Lucy emerged from behind the curtain wrapped in a blanket. Can't sleep? Jack asked. Lucy shook her head and sat down beside him. Papa, I'm scared. I know, sweetheart. Are we really going to die? Jack closed his eyes. He wanted to lie, wanted to promise her everything would be fine, but he'd made enough promises he couldn't keep. I don't know, he said honestly. I'm trying my best to make sure we don't, but I don't know. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mama, my real mama. She used to tell me that God takes care of sparrows, and if he takes care of sparrows, he'll take care of us too. Your mama was a wise woman. Do you believe that, Papa, that God will take care of us? Jack looked at this girl who'd lost her father, her baby sister, nearly her whole family, and somehow still had faith. I think, he said slowly, that God helps those who help themselves. And sometimes that means accepting help when it's offered. But nobody's offering help. Not yet. But maybe. Jack stopped. An idea was forming in his mind, dangerous and desperate. Lucy, go back to bed. Why? What are you thinking? Nothing you need to worry about. Go on now. Lucy hesitated, then obeyed. Jack waited until he heard her settle back onto the bed, then stood and pulled on his coat. Sarah's voice came from the darkness. Where are you going? Out. Jack. I'll be back before dawn. Get some sleep. He walked out before she could argue. The nearest ranch to Jack's was the Morrison place, 5 miles east. Tom Morrison was a good man, fair, hard-working, with a wife and 3 grown sons. He'd been at the wedding, had even shaken Jack's hand and wished him well, but wishing someone well was different from feeding them through a hard winter. Jack walked through the darkness, his boots crunching in the frozen snow. The temperature was dropping fast, and the wind cut through his coat like it was made of paper. By the time he saw the lights of the Morrison ranch, his hands were numb and his face burned with cold. He stood outside the fence for a long moment, trying to find the courage to knock. Pride whispered in his ear, "You're going to beg. You're going to stand there like a beggar and ask another man to save your family because you can't do it yourself." But then he thought about Lily's hollow eyes. Sam and Ben getting thinner every day. Lucy trying to be brave when she was terrified. Sarah carrying a child who might not live to see spring. Jack walked up to the door and knocked. A few moments later, Tom Morrison answered, a rifle in one hand and a lamp in the other. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with kind eyes that sharpened when he saw Jack. "Holloway, what the hell are you doing out here at this hour?" "I need help," Jack said. Tom's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Come inside. You're half frozen." "I can't stay. Jack's voice cracked. "Tom, my family's starving. Wolves got the chickens and half the hay. I went to town today, but it's quarantined. Scarlet fever. And I've got nothing left to trade, nothing left to sell. I'm asking—" He forced the words out. "I'm asking if you can spare anything. Food, hay, anything at all. I'll work it off come spring, I swear. I'll work double hours, I'll—" "Stop," Tom said gently. He set down the rifle. "How many mouths you feeding?" 6, soon to be 7. Tom's eyebrows rose. "Sarah's pregnant." Jack nodded. Tom turned and called into the house. "Martha, get dressed. We're going to help the Holloways." Within 20 minutes, Tom had hitched his wagon and loaded it with supplies. 2 sacks of flour, a cured ham, a wheel of cheese, 3 blankets, a sack of oats for the livestock they didn't have. "Tom, I can't," Jack started. "Yes, you can." Tom climbed onto the wagon seat. "And you will, because that's what neighbors do. Now get in. You're riding back with me." Jack climbed up beside him, his throat too tight to speak. They rode in silence for a while. Then Tom said, "You know I was where you are once, long time ago before the boys were grown. Had a bad winter, lost most of my stock to a blizzard. Thought I was done. Then my neighbors showed up with food and lumber and hay, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. They just said, 'Pay it forward someday.' I don't know how to repay this," Jack said quietly. "Then don't. Just do the same for someone else when you get the chance." Tom glanced at him. "And Holloway, stop trying to do everything alone. Ain't no shame in needing help. Only shame is in being too proud to ask for it." When they reached the cabin, Sarah and Lucy were both awake and waiting. They rushed out when they heard the wagon. "Jack, what?" Sarah stopped when she saw Tom and the supplies. "Tom here brought us some food," Jack said. His voice was rough. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Tom, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just take care of that family." Tom helped Jack unload the supplies, then climbed back onto the wagon. "Oh, and Holloway, I talked to some of the other ranchers before everything got quarantined. We're planning a barn raising for you come spring. Get your fence fixed, your barn reinforced. You'll need it with all those kids." Jack stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're one of us now. You got yourself a family to raise and we look after our own." Tom tipped his hat. "Take care, Holloways." He drove off into the darkness, leaving Jack and Sarah standing in the snow, surrounded by more food than they'd seen in weeks. Lucy touched the flour sacks like she was afraid they'd disappear. "Is this real?" "It's real," Sarah whispered. They carried everything inside. The children woke and gathered around, staring at the supplies with wide eyes. Lily actually smiled, the first real smile Jack had seen from her in days. "Can we eat now?" Ben asked. "Yes," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, we can eat." She cooked real food, ham and beans biscuits made with actual flour cheese sliced thick. The children ate until they couldn't eat anymore, and then they curled up by the fire with full bellies and finally looked like children instead of starving ghosts. Later, after everyone was asleep, Jack stood outside and looked at the stars. He heard the door open and close, and then Sarah was beside him. "You walked 5 miles in the dark to ask for help," she said. "I didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did. You could have let your pride kill us." Sarah took his hand. "But you didn't. You swallowed it and asked. That takes more strength than I think you realize." Jack looked down at their joined hands. "I kept thinking about Lucy, asking if we were going to die. And I couldn't—" His voice broke. "I couldn't promise her we wouldn't. I couldn't keep my promise." "But you did," Sarah said firmly. "You promised you'd figure something out, and you did. You found a way. That's what matters." "Tom Morrison found a way. I just begged." "No, you asked. There's a difference." Sarah moved in front of him so he had to look at her. "Jack, you spent 6 years alone trying to do everything yourself, and it almost killed you. But tonight, you admitted you needed help, and because of that your family is alive. That's not weakness. That's wisdom." Jack pulled her close and buried his face in her hair. She wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on us." "Never," Jack said. "I'll never give up on you." They stood there in the cold, holding each other, and for the first time since the wolves came, Jack felt like maybe, just maybe, they'd survive this winter after all. The next few days passed quietly. With food in their bellies, the children began to come back to life. Color returned to their cheeks. They played instead of sitting silent. Lucy laughed at something Sam said. Lily sang a little song while Sarah braided her hair. Jack spent his days reinforcing the barn, checking the fence line, setting snares for rabbits. He caught 2 and brought them home, and Sarah made stew that lasted 3 days. One morning, the hen finally laid an egg. Lucy found it and ran into the cabin shouting like she'd discovered gold. "Papa, Papa, look!" Jack took the egg carefully, turning it over in his hand. 1 egg, just 1. But it was something. "Good job, Lucy," he said, handing it back to her. "Cook it up for your brothers and sisters." "What about you and Mama?" "We'll eat later." Lucy frowned, but obeyed. She scrambled the egg and divided it carefully among the 4 children. They ate it reverently, savoring every bite. Jack watched from the doorway and felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. That afternoon, he was outside chopping wood when he heard horses. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the front of the cabin, his heart pounding. But when the riders came into view, he recognized them: ranchers from neighboring properties. 6 men, all on horseback, all carrying supplies. Tom Morrison was at the front. He dismounted and grinned. "Told you we look after our own." The other men dismounted and started unloading more flour, salt, pork, dried beans, a bag of cornmeal, even a rooster. "For the hen," one of the ranchers said. "Can't rebuild a flock without a rooster." Jack stared at them, overwhelmed. "I can't. You don't have to." "We know we don't have to," Tom interrupted. "We want to. Now shut up and help us unload." Sarah came outside with the children trailing behind her. When she saw the supplies, she pressed her hand to her mouth. "How did you know?" she asked Tom. Didn't. Just figured you could use the help. Tom ruffled Ben's hair. How you kids doing? Better, Ben said shyly. Good. You take care of your pa, you hear? He's a good man. After the ranchers left, Jack and Sarah stood surrounded by enough food to last until spring. The children were exploring the supplies, marveling at everything. I don't deserve this, Jack said quietly. Yes, you do, Sarah said. You deserve kindness, Jack. You deserve help. You deserve a community that cares about you. Stop punishing yourself for needing people. Jack looked at her, this woman who'd arrived on his doorstep half dead and was now telling him how to live. And he realized she was right. He'd spent 6 years punishing himself for surviving when Anna and Thomas hadn't. 6 years believing he didn't deserve happiness or help or anything good. But that was over now. You're right, he said. Sarah blinked. What? You're right. About all of it. Jack pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Thank you. For what? For teaching me how to live again. That night, Jack slept deeply for the first time in weeks. When he woke, pale morning light was filtering through the window, and Sarah was already up making breakfast. Morning, she said, smiling at him. Morning. Jack sat up and stretched. What's all this? Real breakfast. Eggs, biscuits, bacon. Figured we earned it. The children were already awake and waiting at the table, their faces eager. Jack joined them, and they ate together a real meal, hot and filling. After breakfast, Jack went outside to feed the rooster and check the fence line. The sky was clear and bright, and the temperature had risen just enough to make the cold bearable. He was walking back toward the cabin when he heard a low rumbling sound in the distance. Thunder. Jack looked up. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, moving fast. Too fast. Sarah, he shouted, running for the cabin. Sarah, get the kids inside. Storm's coming. Sarah appeared in the doorway. Her face pale. How bad? Bad. Get them inside now. Within minutes, the wind picked up, howling across the plains like a living thing. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes. Snow began to fall, not soft and gentle, but hard and sharp like needles. Jack ran to secure the barn door, then made sure the animals had shelter. By the time he got back to the cabin, he could barely see 5 feet in front of him. He stumbled inside and slammed the door shut. Sarah and the children were huddled by the fire, fear written on every face. How long will it last? Lucy asked. I don't know, Jack said honestly. He barred the door and added wood to the fire. Could be hours. Could be days. Days. Lily's voice was tiny. Jack knelt beside her. Don't worry, sweetheart. We've got plenty of food now, plenty of wood. We'll be fine. But as the storm raged outside, shaking the cabin walls and howling like 1,000 wolves, Jack wondered if he'd just made another promise he couldn't keep. Chipbag. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that threatened to tear the roof off. 3 days of snow piling up against the walls until the cabin was half buried. 3 days of cold so intense that the water bucket froze solid, even sitting beside the fire. Jack kept the fire burning constantly, feeding it wood whenever it started to die. Sarah rationed the food carefully, making sure everyone ate, but conserving as much as possible. The children huddled together under every blanket they had, telling stories and singing songs to keep their spirits up. On the second night, part of the roof started to leak. Jack and Sarah spent hours stuffing rags into the gaps, trying to keep the snow out. By morning, they were exhausted and soaked through. We can't keep this up, Sarah said quietly so the children wouldn't hear. We don't have a choice. Jack, if the roof caves, it won't. You don't know that. Jack looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, and felt his own fear rising to meet it. But he pushed it down and said firmly, We're going to make it through this. All of us. Together. Sarah nodded, but he could see she didn't quite believe him. On the third day, the wind finally died. Jack opened the door and nearly gasped at what he saw. Snow had drifted up to the eaves of the cabin. The barn was completely buried on one side. The chicken coop, what was left of it, was invisible under white. "We need to dig out," Jack said. He and Lucy worked for hours, shoveling snow away from the doors and windows. Sarah stayed inside with the younger children, keeping them warm and fed. By the time they'd cleared a path to the barn, Jack's arms felt like lead and his back screamed with every movement. But the animals were alive. The hen and rooster huddled together in one corner, frightened but unharmed. "Thank God," Lucy breathed. That night they ate a hot meal and celebrated being alive. The children were giddy with relief, laughing and playing like they hadn't in days. Jack sat by the fire and watched them, and Sarah came and sat beside him. "We made it," she said softly. "Barely. But we did. That's what matters." Sarah took his hand. "Jack, I've been thinking about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "Spring is still 2 months away. We've got food now, but another storm like this..." She stopped. "We need to think about what we'd do if things got worse again." "They won't. You can't promise that." "I can try." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I know you will. But Jack, if it comes down to it, if we have to choose between staying here and keeping the children safe..." "We're not leaving," Jack said firmly. "Even if it means..." "Even then. This is our home, Sarah. This is where we make our stand." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right, then we make our stand together." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn, and Jack prayed they'd never have to find out just how much sacrifice that stand would require. A week after the storm, Jack was outside checking the fence line when he heard Lucy scream. He dropped everything and ran for the cabin, his rifle in his hands, his heart hammering. He burst through the door to find Lucy standing by the window, tears streaming down her face. "What is it?" Jack demanded. "What's wrong?" Lucy pointed outside with a shaking hand. Jack looked and saw wolves, at least a dozen of them circling the property. They were thin and desperate, their ribs showing through their fur, and they were getting closer. "Get away from the window," Jack ordered. "Sarah, get the children to the back of the cabin. Now." Sarah herded the children away while Jack moved to the window. The wolves were spreading out, testing the perimeter. One of them approached the barn sniffing. Jack raised his rifle and fired. The shot echoed across the snow. The wolf yelped and bolted, and the rest of the pack scattered, but they didn't leave. They just moved back, watching. "They're not leaving," Lucy whispered. "I know." Jack reloaded. "Sarah, how much ammunition do we have?" "Maybe 20 rounds." 20 rounds. A dozen wolves. Not nearly enough. "Papa, what are we going to do?" Sam asked, his voice small. Jack looked at his children, all 4 of them, watching him with trust and terror in their eyes. He looked at Sarah, one hand on her swollen belly, and he made a decision. "We're going to fight," he said, "and we're going to win. Because that's what you did when your back was against the wall and your family's lives depended on you. You fought, and you didn't stop fighting until you won, or you died trying." Jack moved quickly, his mind racing through everything he knew about wolves. They hunted in packs. They were smart. And they were desperate, which made them dangerous. "Lucy, come here," he said, keeping his voice calm. When she reached him, he handed her the shotgun. "You know how to use this?" "Papa taught me. Before." She stopped, swallowed. "Yes." "Good. You stand by that window. Don't shoot unless one of them gets within 20 feet of the cabin. Understand?" Lucy nodded, her hands trembling as she took the gun. Jack turned to Sarah. "Keep the little ones in the back room. If anything happens to me..." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Sarah said fiercely. "If it does, you take Lucy and run for the Morrison place. Don't stop, don't look back, just run." "Jack, promise me." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I promise, but you're not dying today." Jack kissed her hard and fast, then turned back to the window. The wolves were still circling, their eyes glowing in the fading afternoon light. He counted them again. 13. Unlucky number. One of them, the largest, probably the alpha, stepped closer to the cabin. It lifted its head and howled, and the sound sent ice down Jack's spine. "They're testing us," he muttered. "Seeing if we'll run." "What do we do?" Lucy asked. "We show them we won't." Jack aimed carefully and fired. The bullet kicked up snow inches from the alpha's paws. The wolf jumped back but didn't flee. Instead, it snarled, showing teeth that looked like knives. "Papa, they're not scared," Lucy whispered. "I know." The wolves began to move again, this time with more purpose. 3 of them broke off and headed toward the barn. 2 more circled around toward the back of the cabin. "They're flanking us," Jack said. Sarah watched the back window. Sarah appeared with the twins, each boy holding a piece of firewood like a club. "I see them." Jack fired again, hitting one of the wolves heading for the barn. It yelped and went down, thrashing in the snow. The others paused, then kept coming. "Damn it," Jack breathed. He reloaded and fired twice more. 1 shot missed. The other caught a wolf in the shoulder, spinning it around. But there were still 10 left, and he was down to 16 rounds. The alpha charged. It came fast, a blur of gray fur and snapping jaws, heading straight for the cabin door. Jack fired and missed. Fired again and caught it in the leg, but it didn't stop. It slammed into the door with enough force to crack the wood. Lucy screamed. Jack grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and ran to the door. The wolf was throwing itself against the wood, snarling and clawing. The bar across the door was beginning to bend. "Help me!" Jack shouted. Sarah ran over and threw her weight against the door. The twins joined her, their small bodies pressed against the wood. But the wolf was strong, and the door was old. "It's going to break through," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. Jack looked around desperately. Then he saw the rope hanging from the ceiling beam, the one he used to haul up supplies in the winter. He grabbed it and looped it around the door handle, then tied it off to the heavy table. "Move," he told Sarah and the boys. They jumped back just as the door splintered. A gray muzzle pushed through the gap, teeth snapping. Jack shoved the poker through the opening, jamming it hard into the wolf's throat. The animal yelped and pulled back, blood staining the snow. But the door was damaged now. 1 more hit and it would give way completely. "Lucy!" Jack shouted. "Shoot anything that moves!" Lucy fired the shotgun. The blast was deafening in the small cabin. Through the window, Jack saw one of the wolves go down, its chest blown open. The others scattered but didn't flee. They regrouped 20 yards away, watching and waiting. "We can't hold them off forever," Sarah said quietly. "We don't have to. Just until dark." Jack checked the windows. The sun was already touching the horizon. "Wolves don't like fire. Once it's dark, we build up the fire and throw burning logs outside. Create a barrier they won't cross." "Will that work?" "It has to." The next hour was the longest of Jack's life. The wolves tested them again and again, rushing the barn, circling the cabin, howling, until the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jack fired carefully, making every bullet count. Lucy reloaded the shotgun with shaking hands. Sarah kept the children calm, singing softly to Lily, while the twins stood guard at the back window. By the time darkness fell, Jack was down to 8 rounds. They'd killed or wounded 4 wolves, but the rest were still out there waiting. "All right," Jack said. "Sarah, you and Lucy drag those logs close to the door. I'll get the fire going hot." They worked quickly. Jack piled wood onto the fire until flames leaped up the chimney. Then he took one of the burning logs and opened the door just enough to shove it outside. The log landed in the snow and sputtered, but didn't go out. Jack threw another, then another, creating a semicircle of fire around the front of the cabin. The wolves backed away from the flames, their eyes reflecting orange and gold. "It's working," Lucy breathed. Jack threw the last log and slammed the door shut, then barred it again with the rope and a fresh plank of wood. His arms were shaking from exhaustion. "Now we wait," he said. They waited through the night. The wolves prowled just beyond the circle of firelight, their shapes dark and menacing. Every time the flames began to die, Jack added more logs. His supply was running low, but he didn't dare let the fire go out. Around midnight, Lily started crying. "I'm scared, Papa." Jack picked her up and held her close. "I know, sweetheart, but you're safe. I promise. The wolves won't get past me. I won't let them." Lily buried her face in his shoulder. Jack held her and looked at Sarah across the room. She was sitting with the twins, their heads in her lap. Lucy leaned against the wall by the window, the shotgun still in her hands. His family, bruised and terrified, but alive. "I'm sorry," Jack said quietly. Sarah looked up. "For what?" "For bringing you into this, for not being able to protect you better, for—" "Stop." Sarah's voice was firm. "Jack, you saved our lives. If you hadn't taken us in, we'd have died in the snow weeks ago. Whatever happens tonight, we're together. That's what matters." "She's right, Papa," Lucy added. "We're not scared, because we're with you. We're brave because you taught us how to be." Jack's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak. The night wore on. The wolves didn't leave, but they didn't attack either. They just waited, and Jack waited with them, watching the fire burn lower and lower. Around 3 in the morning, Jack heard something that made his heart stop. Hoofbeats. "Someone's coming," he said, moving to the window. Through the darkness, he saw riders, at least a dozen of them, carrying torches and rifles. Tom Morrison was at the front, his face grim. "Holloway," Tom shouted. "You all right in there?" "We're alive," Jack called back. "Good, stay inside." The riders spread out, circling the wolves. The animals turned, snarling, suddenly finding themselves surrounded. Tom raised his rifle and fired, and the other men followed suit. The sound was like thunder. The wolves scattered. 2 more went down, and the rest fled into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as they'd come. Tom dismounted and walked up to the cabin. Jack opened the door. "How did you know?" Jack asked. "Heard the shots earlier. Figured you were in trouble." Tom looked past Jack at the family huddled inside. "Everyone all right?" "Thanks to you." "Well, you're one of us now. Can't let wolves take out one of our own." Tom smiled. "Besides, I owed you one for that time you helped me with my roof." Jack blinked. "That was 10 years ago." "Still counts." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll keep watch the rest of the night. Make sure those wolves don't come back. You get some sleep." "Tom, I don't know how to thank you." "You already did. You took in a woman and her kids when nobody else would. That's worth more than all the thanks in the world." Tom turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Jack. When spring comes, you're joining us for Sunday dinners. Martha insists." Jack laughed, actually laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "We'll be there." After the ranchers left, Jack barred the door one last time and turned to find Sarah waiting for him. She wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over," Jack agreed. They stood there in the quiet cabin, listening to the children breathe and the fire crackle, and Jack felt something shift inside him. The fear that had lived in his chest for weeks, the certainty that he would fail, that he couldn't protect them, that they would all die, finally loosened its grip. They'd survived. Against wolves and storms and starvation and his own stubborn pride, they'd survived. "Come to bed," Sarah said softly. For the first time since she'd arrived, Jack didn't sleep on the floor. He climbed into bed beside Sarah, and she curled against him, her head on his chest. Within minutes, she was asleep. Jack lay awake a little longer, listening to his family breathe. Lucy snoring softly. The twins murmuring in their sleep. Lily sucking her thumb. And Sarah warm and alive in his arms, carrying new life. He thought about the man he'd been 6 years ago, broken and alone, convinced he'd never feel anything but grief again. And he thought about the man he was now, a husband, a father part of a community that cared whether he lived or died. Tom was right. He wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. Jack closed his eyes and slept. Spring came slowly. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and frozen earth. The temperature warmed just enough to make going outside bearable. And one morning, Jack woke to the sound of birds. Actual birds singing in the cottonwood tree behind the cabin. "Listen," Sarah set her hand on her swollen belly. "Spring." Jack kissed her temple. About time. Over the next few weeks, the world transformed. Green shoots pushed through the soil. The creek behind the cabin began to flow again. The hen laid eggs regularly, and soon they had chicks peeping in the barn. True to his word, Tom Morrison organized a barn raising. Ranchers came from all over, men Jack barely knew, but who treated him like family. They rebuilt the chicken coop, reinforced the barn, and fixed the fence line. By the end of the day, the ranch looked better than it had in years. Martha Morrison brought food, so much food that Sarah laughed and cried at the same time. "We'll never eat all of this." "That's the idea," Martha said, hugging her. "You save what you can, share what you can't. That's how we survive out here." That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Jack and Sarah sat on the porch and watched the sun set. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, "about names." "Names." She patted her belly. "For the baby. If it's a boy, I want to name him Thomas, after your son." Jack's breath caught. "Sarah? And if it's a girl, Mary, after mine." Sarah looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "They should be remembered, both of them." Jack pulled her close and kissed her hair, too overwhelmed to speak. He just nodded and held her while the sky turned gold and red. A month later, on a warm April evening, Sarah went into labor. Jack had sent Lucy running for Martha Morrison at the first sign. Now he paced the cabin floor while Martha and Sarah worked behind the curtain. The children sat by the fire, silent and wide-eyed. "Is Mama going to be all right?" Lily asked. "She's going to be fine," Jack said, though his hands were shaking. Hours passed. Sarah's cries grew louder, then softer, then stopped altogether. Jack's heart nearly stopped with them. Then he heard it, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn. Martha appeared holding a tiny bundle wrapped in cloth. "You've got a son, Jack." Jack took the baby with trembling hands. The infant was red-faced and screaming, his tiny fists waving. And he was perfect. "Thomas?" Jack whispered. "His name is Thomas." The children crowded around, marveling at their new brother. Lucy touched his tiny hand, and Thomas gripped her finger with surprising strength. "He's strong," Lucy said, smiling through tears. "Just like Papa." Behind the curtain, Sarah called weakly, "Let me see him." Jack carried Thomas to her. Sarah was pale and exhausted, but when she saw the baby, her face lit up. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Jack sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Sarah, their son between them. The other children climbed onto the bed too, a tangle of arms and legs and love. "We did it," Sarah said softly. "We made it through." Jack looked around at his family. Lucy with her fierce courage, Sam and Ben with their quiet strength, Lily with her gentle spirit, and now Thomas, brand new and full of possibility, and Sarah, who'd walked through hell and come out the other side with grace. "Yeah," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "We did." Musa. Summer came in full force. The ranch thrived under Jack's care. The gardens Sarah planted produced more vegetables than they could eat. The chickens multiplied. Jack bought 2 cows with money he'd earned helping Tom Morrison repair a barn. They were still poor, still struggling. But they were making it. One evening in late July, Jack found himself standing on the hill behind the cabin, the hill where Anna and Thomas were buried. He hadn't visited in 3 years, hadn't been able to face it. But now he walked up slowly and stood before the 2 simple crosses. The grass had grown over the graves, and wildflowers bloomed all around them. "I'm sorry I stayed away so long," Jack said quietly. "I was angry. At you for leaving, at God for taking you, at myself for surviving." He paused. "But I'm not angry anymore." He pulled a handful of wildflowers and laid them on the graves. "I met someone," he continued. "Her name is Sarah. She's got 4 kids, 5 now counting the baby. And Anna, I think you'd like her. She's strong and stubborn, and she doesn't take any of my nonsense. She reminds me of you, actually." A breeze rustled through the cottonwood tree, and Jack smiled. "I still love you. Both of you. That'll never change. But I'm learning that love doesn't have to die just because people do. It can grow and change and make room for new people." He touched each cross gently. "Thank you for teaching me how to love. And thank you for sending Sarah to my door. I think you'd have wanted me to help her, to have a family again." He stood there a while longer, saying goodbye to the past. Then he turned and walked back down the hill toward the cabin. Sarah was on the porch nursing Thomas. Lucy was chasing the twins around the yard. Lily sat in the garden making flower crowns. When Sarah saw Jack, she smiled. "You all right?" "Yeah," Jack said, sitting beside her. "I'm all right." That night, after the children were asleep, Jack lay in bed with Sarah curled against him. Through the window, he could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Taking us in?" "Not once. Even with all the trouble, the wolves and the storms, and nearly starving. Especially because of that." Jack tightened his arm around her. "You know what I realized? I was already dying before you showed up. Dying slowly, one lonely day at a time. And then you knocked on my door and asked me to save your children. But the truth is, Sarah, you saved me." Sarah lifted her head to look at him. "We saved each other." "Yeah," Jack agreed. "I guess we did." She kissed him softly, then settled back against his chest. Within minutes, she was asleep. Jack lay awake a little longer, listening to the sounds of his home. Thomas making small noises in his sleep. The twins breathing in tandem. Lucy murmuring something unintelligible. Lily's soft snores. And Sarah warm and steady beside him. 6 years ago, he'd lost everything. He'd buried his wife and son and thought his life was over. He'd lived like a ghost going through the motions, but never really living. And then a starving widow knocked on his door in the middle of the night and gave him a choice: turn her away and stay safe in his grief, or open the door and risk his heart again. He'd opened the door. And in doing so, he'd found something he thought was gone forever, a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to fight through hard winters and hungry days, a reason to hope. He'd found family. Not the family he'd planned on, not the life he'd imagined, but something better, something built on ashes and grief and second chances, something real and messy and beautiful. Jack Holloway closed his eyes and slept peacefully, knowing that when he woke up, he wouldn't be alone. He'd never be alone again. He had Sarah and Lucy and Sam and Ben and Lily and little Thomas, and together they were stronger than any storm, any wolf, any winter that Montana could throw at them. They were a family forged in fire and snow and hunger, held together by love and stubborn hope. And that was worth everything.